All right, good evening, and
Hello.
hello, Adam. I'm Kristen Aguilar. I am the Executive Director of the Castanea Fellowship.
I'm Adam Leibowitz. I'm Community Food Funders Director at North Star Fund, and I direct the Seeding Power Fellowship.
And this evening, we're going to be talking about how fellowships are actually movement infrastructure. And to me, fellowship is kind of a weird, antiquated word in a way. It's a wordy word, as I like to say. So I'm curious how you define fellowship and what it means in your work at Seeding Power.
Yeah, thank you. When I hear fellowship, the first thing that comes to mind is Lord of the Rings. So throw out everything you think you know about fellowships or in academic institutions and things like that. To me, the old model of fellowships where the student or the fellow is just an empty vessel to be filled with knowledge in this didactic model to then be kind of unleashed into the world and to do good. That's not how we do things at Seeding Power. I think of us much more as a movement building program. We absolutely enhance the innate leadership of the fellows and the people that are involved. But we bring them together to be in community, to build relationships across all the different sectors and issue areas of the food system, and trust that they will find the connections to birth new possibilities into their work, that if they can learn from each other, learn where each other's work is and where it's going, they have the wisdom to make the connections. And so our design really is to bring folks from urban agriculture and food producers and farmers and public health and climate activists and emergency food and food systems infrastructure and on and on and on and on, so that they can build together and break down a lot of the silos that we typically operate in. And as of our last cohort, we also include funders. And that was an intentional decision with the acknowledgement that it was yet one more kind of silo to break down to bring this movement work really together, where all sides can be working together in their full humanity without the labels of the way that they work or where they work or any of that stuff. And so I'll turn it back to you in a second, but let's talk about the curriculums that we actually do, right? So the curriculum of Seeding Power, which was designed with the team at Emerging Equity, so got to give them major props, is to focus on what stands in the way of those collaborations. We ask our fellows to interrogate how dominant culture values show up in themselves and in their work, how they've been conditioned around conflict and conflict avoidance usually, and how that can get in the way of work, and then practice courageous conversations and how to move past that so that we can step into a liberatory path forward to the way that we want our work to go. And then we end our program, it's a 9-month program, and we end it with a demonstration project where the fellows are asked to ideate together in teams, produce a collaboration project that may or may not ever actually happen in reality, but to put into practice everything that had happened beforehand. Along with all of that, a core part of our work, or of our program, is rest. It's bringing folks together to play and have joy and unwind and recharge, which is also a critical piece of the movement infrastructure that we're talking about. So that's how we do things. I know there's some similarities and some differences with Castanea. Why don't you tell us?
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of our core philosophies and how we operate, and even some of the things we do, are very similar. I think the biggest difference is in scale, right? Yeah. Castanea is a national fellowship, so we're working, across all of the country in the territories. And we are looking to support fellows. We say we're nourishing liberatory leaders, right? To support fellows across sector, across geography, across identity, across strategy, to bring folks together to really focus on our two main goals, which is rest and restoration for movement leaders and building solidarity among movement leaders and their communities. So the core of our programming really is rooted in in-person immersions that we do. We do 4 of them over the course of an 18-month fellowship. And each of those in-person immersions is really rooted in being completely place-based. In every sense of that word, I think it's used a lot. I think that word is used a lot. And really community-based, both phrases that are used often. And really letting the land and the people that we are visiting drive what our programming looks like while we're there, right? I think a lot of movement has to be related to the land that we're on. We are not just a movement with each other, we're in movement with the earth. And so, yeah, we really have spacious programming that's focused on this restoration for leaders. I think we all know what a problem it is to have burnout among our leaders, especially in justice work, right? Like, you're not only doing the nonprofit work, you're like carrying this burden of moving justice forward against all of these oppressive systems. And so it's exhausting. And the thing that fills people up is the movement work, right? Mm-hmm. Which is another word I think that gets used often and is not necessarily grounded in truth or the reality of what movement is. And it is truly community-based, community accountable, and folks who are doing true liberation and justice work. And so how do we bring them together? Like, what does that look like in practice, right? It's really hard, I think, to conceptualize what we say. We're like, okay, a fellowship for movement infrastructure. Like, what does that mean? And like, as you said, right, like, it's joy. It is finding these spaces of connection and deep relationship building. I think all of us really, whenever we think of like the most impactful time in our lives, it was not like a board training or learning how to read financial statements for a nonprofit, right? It was meeting somebody. It was having a deep connection with somebody who you could call on later. And that's exactly what's happening, I think, in both of our fellowships, right? Like, we just had, for example, our last cohort, cohort 3, which have just transitioned to alumni, all self-organized and came together recently to do a sheep shearing at one of their fellows with her family. And it's like this form of mutual aid, being accountable to each other, showing up for each other. It's like this little story that is part of this much larger web of connectivity. And it's really beautiful to see. It's so necessary. We need these spaces of restoration so that people can be bold and vision. That is how change happens. When it's like the grind, like daily grind, and you cannot step out of that and you cannot connect with others, you don't have the space to dream new worlds into being, right, which is what we're doing. And I think if you want to talk about, like, why do you think that, like, why is this important now? I think we all know, but I'm curious to hear, like, how you're thinking about it.
I'm going to go off script for a second, though, and ask you a question back. I didn't mention our region, so it's exactly right that Castanea is a national fellowship. Seating Power focuses on New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. But you mentioned a few times these terms that we throw around or that get said too often. And before we were recording, you have talked to me about the term leader itself and how that is a troublesome term that needs to be workshopped a bit. Can you just say a little more about that?
Yeah, I think all our fellows have had trouble even calling themselves leaders. I think, like, our selection process, whenever we like put it out there in the world and we open applications, we talk about liberation, we talk about justice, we talk about creating pro-Black, pro-Indigenous spaces. Like, these are very specific things that we're talking about. And so the folks who are drawn to that are very low ego leaders who have a really hard time, like, standing up and like, I am the face of my community. Absolutely. They hate claiming that in a lot of ways. And so, whenever we're talking about leader, we are talking about people who have the resources to be able to step up and move for their community and with their community, right? They're not like leading others like behind them and as a train, right? They're moving their community along, and they're creating and they're supporting and they are cultivating leaderful communities themselves.
Yeah, no, I think that I can't tell you how many of the fellows in our program that have said afterwards, I almost didn't apply, I didn't think this was for me, I'm not a leader. And the way we talk about it is, if you have a community that you are accountable to, who trusts you with the work, then you are a leader. And that's how we really look at it. So why now? Another phrase that's used far too often these days, now more than ever, So now more than ever, these kinds of programs, I think, are needed. Well, one, we've hinted at it, but let's say explicitly that we focus intentionally on BIPOC leadership, right? In our case, it's not exclusive, but that is what our program is rooted in. And we know that racial justice work is under attack right now. A lot of the food and farming system is under attack. In good days, less than 3% of philanthropic dollars go to social justice movements. So if we are here creating movement infrastructure, that, I would argue, is vital at all times. And now, when we talk about the burnout, the stress that our communities are under, having the space to be in community with others that isn't about getting a job done, but it's about filling your bucket. It's about being in relationship, and yeah, maybe having some fun. Wild concept. We all know in our own lives that we are stronger in community. Like when you are going through a hard time and you want to lean on someone, right? So that is what we're all going through right now. And if we have networks and relationships to draw upon, it makes us stronger as individuals. It makes the work that as funders we're funding stronger. It makes the work happen faster. It gets us closer to victory, however you want to define that. And I don't think that we can know what the next crisis is going to be, but we know what's needed to get through it, and that's mutual aid. That's a community that can be mobilized quickly. So in our neck of the woods in New York, there's an anecdote I like to tell. Right when COVID hit, kind of March of 2020, and all the feeding programs shut down, all restaurants shut down. There's two counties on opposite sides of the Hudson River where had vastly different experiences in how they responded to it. So in one county, there was a very robust nonprofit network. Now, they had the luxury of having a funder who had brought them all together, but there was network in place, and they mobilized to have one of the most amazing kind of food chain responses that I saw during COVID, where farmers were bringing excess crops, restaurants were cooking meals, volunteers were delivering it into food pantries, and then delivering it out in meals to folks that couldn't leave their home. And right across the river, there was another county scrambling to try to figure something like this out because the network didn't exist. And so when we talk about critical movement infrastructure, that's what it means to me. It's being able to mobilize whatever the crisis or the impetus is to need to activate that network.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things I think that is such a good indicator that it's working, is that these people were brought together and it worked. It's one of those things where it's like, that's not always the case, right? If you're a funder said we have to collaborate, right? And whenever we're talking about the fellowships, it's like creating the instances for people to trust each other, to open up and build these deep relationships. I asked, some of our fellows, coming from, my background as being a leader in an organization that was doing grassroots and community-rooted work, and not from, say, a leadership development background, for example. I knew, how stretched and under-resourced leaders are in this work. And so I've asked folks before, is this too much? Are we asking too much? We're asking you to leave your home for 4 weeks over the 18 months. How intense is this for you all? And they're like, this does not sap me. This fills me up. Being in here, even if we're talking about work, it fills me up. And so, yeah, I think just the big takeaway from all of this too is movement infrastructure and the support of movement infrastructure is so important. I think funders need to be focusing not just on their grantees and moving money there, which they should be moving money there, and you have to fund the field for them. You have to fund the infrastructure so that we're not just, surviving, that you can actually thrive in these spaces. I think all of the isms are fighting against us to keep us isolated.
Right.
And movement infrastructure work is what keeps us connected. And that is the only way that we are going to win and be able to move forward.
Absolutely. Yeah, in our last cohort, we talked about how just being in community is an act of resistance, right? Systems do not want us collaborating.
Yeah.
We're supposed to be, consuming and going home and staying on our screens and doing whatever, right? And feeling helpless and weak. And so coming together, especially Black and brown food producers and food actors, is itself a transgressive act and is building power. So, right on.
Yeah, mic drop. Great. Thank you all.
All right.
We look forward to seeing you next year in Savannah, Georgia for the 2026 Forum.